Hi everybody, thank you for coming to our budget workshop. Excited to see so many faces. How this will work tonight, normally we're kind of have tables in the square in the middle of the room, but I think we counted on the fact that we would need a lot of seats, so we're set up a little bit more formally, so I apologize for that. The way this will work is Mike Roy will give us a presentation on the work that's been done so far on the city side, and I believe after that he'll turn it over to Eric Haley, who will talk about what the school has discussed amongst themselves. At that point, there will be some discussion with the council with questions and answers and suggestions. Unlike the city council meeting, when we do open it up for questions from the audience, this isn't this is a budget workshop, so it won't be a time to come up and kind of just complain about the budget. What we're looking for is if you have a question about something you heard or a suggestion, anything budget related, that would be the time to do that. Our next meeting as a city council next Tuesday would be the time if you have simply commentary. But tonight, please bring questions and suggestions. We welcome that. And without any further ado, I am going to turn this over to Mike Roy to lead us in the city discussion.
Thank you, Nick. We have two handouts tonight, blue and white, and I know Greg is making extra copies, so if you don't have one, everyone, oh, here you go. Okay.
I guess I need
Yeah. Probably would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, they're coming.
I guess while you're just kind of going at it.
One more blue.
Well, I have
One thing. I'll just blue one. Are you? No, I didn't.
Yeah, it's the same.
Mike, you know the school budget for Dana? No?
Nope, he's the only two hands.
She needs a copy.
I have a blue one.
We're fine.
All right, I think we'll start. Steve, I guess there are more copies needed way out back. Thank you. As the mayor explained, this is a workshop session, so we thought the easiest way for the council and, of course, you folks in the audience to see what we're talking about is to try to make a display. I'm sorry for those of you on the far end if it's a little small for you to read, but essentially what we show here are three different budget years: 14-15, 15-16, 16-17, which is a budget year that started July 1st, because the city and school are of July 1st to June 30 fiscal year. Not a calendar year, but a July 1 to June 30 year. So our budget year started in July, and we still don't have a budget. So that's what we're here for tonight, is to try to get out the information as to what the numbers look like from when we started working on the budget, when the council started working on the budget way back in March. So it's been from March to now, to this point, to try to get us to a point where hopefully we can come to a mill rate that's going to be acceptable to most of you. It will not be acceptable to all, we realize that, but we've tried to make an effort in this very last column that you see here. So what we're talking about is the white sheet that you have. And that white sheet, last column, shows the reductions that are being proposed in the city budget and the school budget. So at the very top, you can see the city's top line, where our budget is $55,000 more than last year, $17,600,000 versus $17,545,000. 55,000 on 17 million is a pretty small percent. In fact, the school's request, 21,171,000, is $6,000 less, 6,800 less than the prior year. So when you put those two together, that's the total demand on taxation from the expenditure side, 48,338. Next comes a listing of what we have for revenues. TIF funds. Fund balance is, another word for fund balance is surplus. Then we have other revenue sources and the school, the very important school subsidy sources shown there. So when we add up all those revenues and basically deduct them from our expenses, we're looking at an effect of a 1.2 million, 1.2 mil decrease in our tax rate. So before the reval is even factored in, when you look at expenditures, revenues, our budget picture is 889,000 less than last year. 1.2 mil decrease. Okay, and now might be a good time to open it up. Question on the council's part. I know that you've seen most of this before. The only other display sheet we have will be the blue sheet on specific areas within the city budget.
So just to clarify, where we were after the reval was with your new values, the mill rate was going to be 24.5 or 24.5. What we're looking at, where we are with this as it stands now, is 22.8.
Right. We're at 27.8 for our current mill rate. 22.8 is the proposed, so that's a 5 mil decrease. 1.2 of that is from this picture you see. The other 3.8 mils result from the revaluation work. So our total city value increased enough so that the mill rate has decreased by 3.8 mils based on the reval work. So 3.8, 1.2 gives you your 5 mil decrease from 27.8 to 22.8.
And anyone who's in the back, there are open seats scattered throughout. If anybody, feel free to just come up, but don't worry about walking forward if you want to see.
And Mike, it should be noted that this 1.2 mil is actually a lot more than we originally projected, because I thought the original mill that we were looking at was 24.5, so now we're talking 22.8?
Right, well, that's right. We first thought we'd be at 24.5, and then of course we heard from people who have received their valuation notices, and the city and school were asked to come up with additional reductions, which we did in the amount of $750,000, $375,000 from the city and $375,000 from the school. Together is $750,000. So that represents 1 mil. So that's where we went from 24.5 down to 23.5 with our mill rate. Since that time, you mentioned 22.8. We've talked about 22.8. Well, how did you go from 23.5 proposed mill rate to 22.8?
24.5.
Well, 24.5 to 23.5 was reductions in expenditures. Okay, 23.5, and then from 23.5 to 22.8 was the result of the city's value from the reval work being a lot higher than what we knew even 2 weeks ago. So that revaluation increase, or increase in our total value, allowed us to drop another 7/10 of a mil, 23.5 to 22.8. So that's where we stand with the picture you see here, and I don't know if you want to go on to the next slide, or if there are other questions in this picture.
Mike, we do have a question about.
Just as a clarification, Mike, I'm assuming that the 38,772 expenses and the 22,247 in revenue, the difference between those two numbers, which is like 16.5 million, that's actually the property tax, right?
Right.
Because you're showing 22.2 in revenues and 38.7 in expense, on 38.8 in expenses.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So you're not actually showing a line item that says tax revenue.
The difference to be made up with tax
The
revenue.
difference would be made
What-
up with the
what-
tax revenue.
I think on the next slide, no,
It
we
is
don't.
like this.
No, we don't.
Yeah, no, you're right.
That excise taxes are in all other.
Excise taxes are in all other city revenues.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's about 1.8 million-ish.
yeah, I mean, the city really basically only has three major revenues. Yeah, excise, you just mentioned, for vehicles being registered. State revenue sharing, and property taxes. Those basically are our three biggest revenue sources. I'm not including the school in this because the school has their own two, well, especially the school subsidy revenue. But on the city side, it's basically vehicle excise, property taxes, state revenue sharing. Our state revenue sharing has gone down an average of $1 million a year over the last 5 years. So each one of the last 5 years, we've lost $1 million, $1 million, $1 million. Not cumulatively, but each year, it's been $1 million less than it was 5 years prior.
Actually, a lot more or less than it was 10 years ago.
10 years ago, we were probably about 2.9 million in annual revenue from the state revenue sharing. We're at 1.1 now,
So that's 1.8 million.
less.
2.9 was what by statute we should have received, correct?
Correct. Questions from the council?
But as our revenue's gone down in that sense, the spending also has increased too, which is something that we've looked at.
Spending has increased, we borrowed money, our debt service has gone up. As a matter of fact, in the, on the city expense side, I mean, in that $17,600,000 number you see right at the very top, I don't know if I can reach there, up at the very top, that expenditure was $342,000 more because of a debt service increase and a retirement, main state retirement thing, which we talked about during budget time. So if we hadn't had that $372,000 in that 17.6, we would have been quite a bit below last year, quite a bit below. Okay? I have one other question.
Yes.
Like, do we get any revenue from the gas when they put those lines in?
Yes.
Gas company?
Well, we get property tax revenue because when the lines are put in the ground, they're assessed. Yep, so we collect property taxes.
We get TIF funds too, don't we? TIF funds?
Well, from the gas line piping that's installed, we tax them, and some of that money goes into a TIF fund, some of that revenue. So we have seen an increase in our revenues as a result of.
How about cable TV?
We receive, yes, we do tax them also. And we receive some money annually from the franchise fee that all of us pay that have cable TV. Yeah. And one key to our budget dilemma is to try to capture revenues wherever we can.
Any more questions on this slide? Okay.
I just have a quick question. You mentioned the budget has gone down this year for the school. Has the population of the school enrollees gone down or up?
I'll let Mr. Haley answer that when the time comes,
Okay.
because he's going to speak after I am.
Sure. And the other question, I've heard a lot about how the state hasn't paid the 1 million plus revenue that they should have to the city of Waterville.
Right.
Is there any way to get a task force to see how to recuperate that or hold payments from the state of Maine to compensate for that? Because I know a lot of hospitals hire lawyers and teams to recoup money. I mean, if they're not paying it, collectively, maybe Fairfield and Winslow could hire a lawyer or a team to get that money, or turn around and withhold payments to the state of Maine to compensate for money that wasn't paid to Waterville.
Well, we have 494 towns and cities across the state. They're all in the same boat. So we've all talked about the same strategy, and unless the legislature appropriates more money for state revenue sharing, there's really nothing we can do. Even though the law says that they're required to return to us 5% of what they collect, they are now returning to us about 2.3% of what they collect. That's a far cry from 5%. If we're collecting that revenue, which by law we are supposed to get, we wouldn't be having this kind of budget
Right,
discussion.
and that was my question. I mean, if it's a law, is there no one to represent to uphold that law?
At this time, we've tried everything.
Okay.
Governor LePage got 153 million surplus this year, which he reported in July, and rather than say that he wanted to increase revenue sharing, he wants to cut taxes for the wealthiest Mainers. Thinking perhaps, as he always has, that somehow that's going to trickle down and make life better for us. Unfortunately, I'm afraid it doesn't work that way.
Right. Well, neither does losing $1 million annually in revenue and then increasing annual spending by $4 million.
Well, sometimes you have to increase things. You've got contracts, you've got insurance, you've got
Yep, some of it,
The cost of trucks goes up.
some of it. But not all.
I mean, our cost of living goes up as a normal, regular person, so obviously city expenses are gonna go up.
Right, my point is that, to point to just a $1 million annual thing, it is an issue. That's why myself and the people from municipalities all over the state go down when the state's presenting its biennial budget and argue and to fight for our revenue sharing. But the reality is, there's a reality on the ground of how that translates into tax rates and people's affordability to live in their homes. So it is a piece of it, but we shouldn't give the message that that's the only thing going on. Is my only point.
So now we're on to the blue sheet. And this is just for the city departments, so if any of you were to say, well, where does the city spend its money? Again, city side, not school. Mr. Haley will be up after we're done with this piece, but essentially these are all of our city departments. That's where our $17 million is spent in those different departments that you see. So when we were at a mill rate, and I should say that this third column is what the budget essentially that the city council approved a few weeks ago, and then we realized at 24.5 that mill rate was not going to work. The city department heads were asked to work to get the mill rate down to 23.5. So on our side, we proposed a $375,000 cut, and the school has done the same thing. So if you want to see how we came up with the 375 on our side, it's really that last column on the right that you see on your sheet. And so all department heads came in. It may not seem like much on these reductions. Everyone was asked for a 1% reduction in their city budgets. Some departments exceeded that. One was below. Library, I want to thank them for going above the 1% that we've seen in the other departments. Thank you, Sarah, and people on the library board.
Yes, and actually, thank you. It should be noted that was done before anybody asked for anything to be done. The library simply went back and said, hey, we've heard the people, we want to be part of the solution. And as great of a resource as the library is, they whittled it down and came up with a very significant So thank you. I know you said in the paper it wasn't a big number, it's a big number.
It's a big number, and I just want everyone here to know it is above 1%, it's 5%.
Yeah.
We took a 5%.
But it also means, if I'm correct, the library won't be open on Sundays.
Yes, that will.
Oh, it will?
No, will not.
It does
Okay.
mean that,
Oh,
yes,
yes,
it does.
Right.
It's,
Right, so,
they're gonna have a day off.
But it also makes it so that we the residents can report on their
that's
house's
fine, it's
balance.
just, I
Yeah.
mean, we should be upfront about what the impact is of that. I thank you, but I'm sure that will be sad for some residents to know that it's not open on Sundays.
And I want to personally commend Cindy Jacobs and Sarah too for that faith effort because, again, they came forth. I've had discussions with Cindy, and the library is a very major, reliable resource for a lot of residents and people coming in and using it as a service center as well from outlying regions. So it's definitely a sacrifice that is noted, and a 5% is just amazing. So I commend you, Cindy, and your team for doing that, and the sacrifice that you made coming forth is to be commended.
So we spent 4 months going over these departments one by one by one, so I know you know them pretty well. I don't know if you have any questions on the specific cuts. The way the budget process works on the city side is the department heads come to me as city manager and say, here's my budget for next year and items that I think our department needs. I work with that department head. Some things make it, some things don't. For instance, the police felt that with their cruisers, 3 were in need of replacement. When I presented the budget to the city council, I eliminated one of the 3. Now with the reduction shown on this blue sheet for the police department in the amount of 38, thank you. The second cruiser's been eliminated, so that means instead of replacing 3, we're replacing 1. We know they have to be replaced someday, kind of kicking the can down the road, hoping the other 2 don't develop major problems. That's one way. With the police department's 1%, they were able to achieve that, and all the other department heads went through similar things. Some of the city departments have very, very little in the way of equipment and supplies. It's mostly personnel, and so finding a 1 or 2% within departments depends on just how big the total their budget is personnel-wise. Questions from the council on any of those items?
I also want to recognize Public Works as well, because Public Works is a department that really carries a lot of weight and load to find a surplus or find a cut to satisfy a lot of other funds and a lot of other departments. And that's duly noted on Mark Turner, being very frugal and being a good budget maker himself. I want to commend and shout out that to Mark Turner as well.
You're right. Public Works has kind of taken the brunt from the task. And now that we're speaking of that, this line item here which is labeled capital improvements, is really our paving amount for the year. So you see 200,000. So we're proposing to eliminate 82,500 from that paving, which means we'll have just a little over half what we'd hope to have to pave roads. So that's another thing, we're kind of kicking the can down the road. Our roads have to be taken care of someday. So, but to get to our 375, we felt that was one place we could do it.
Another question, Mike. So where is debt service in this? Is this allocated by departments? Is it in? Oh, I see it there. So the question is, have there been any thought about restructuring?
Yeah, we are still looking into that. So your question from last week is still a good one for us to look at. Yeah. So the principal can be reduced maybe for the next 2 or 3 years.
Right.
We could end up with a balloon payment at the end, but the next couple of years are going to be.
You just do a different sort of structure than have to be true balloon payment.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is, we've just recently redone some of those loans.
We did refinance twice in the last.
Our oldest bonds, as far as interest rates, 2011. So we refinanced everything we could when it became a right. But you can get them all at low interest rates.
But you can still,
The only way would be to push out the principal longer.
well, that's the whole idea, that's exactly right.
Right, but
You
what
can't
would we
depend on the
bond for
equipment that it's tied to.
But, yeah, but you could also taxable, so you've got complete flexibility.
Are you tied to the lifespan of the equipment when you bond for
We
equipment?
bond for it, when we bond for it, we have to stay with the lifespan. What if we put it
Not
on bond?
even taxable.
What's that?
Do a taxable muni
If
bond.
you taxable,
Then we
you
can
go
go taxable.
do whatever you want with it. And the rates are still low.
So obviously, we can't take 1% out of debt service, that's something that's gotta be paid. So you see a couple other items like that. Cemeteries being one.
Could that affect your bond rating?
What's that?
Could that affect our bond rating?
What's-
Our credit rating?
What effect?
Restructuring? No.
Additional debt maybe, but restructuring.
But
Some ways
but
you
you're
can
not
help it.
saving any money.
Depending on the financial circumstances.
Down the road.
Other questions, second answer?
Fire department?
Fire department,
Yeah,
right?
$20,000 less. I'm just curious. I don't remember how 20,000 came.
How would you find
Yeah.
20,000 there? Because it was pretty tight when
Yeah.
you looked at it, right?
So what did we give up for?
Chief?
I'm gonna need help from Chief LaFountain on the reduction there, because I don't remember the specific items.
Basically, what we did is, he took some out of facility maintenance. The lion's share, 12,000, we took out of training. I've already canceled some scheduled training that we had lined up to allow for that. Wearing apparel, which is our bunker gear. Took some out of that line. Tried to take 2,000 out of safety equipment, communication equipment, fire equipment, stuff that can hurt us. And the only comment I've had is, any more cuts? So now I don't have anything on it.
Thank you. That's
Is that gonna
exactly what I wanted
prevent
to
you
hear.
from doing your job? I mean, is that going to prevent the fire department from doing their job?
Depending on, if there was another cut,
Of
comes
personnel.
into play, well, personnel, but I
yeah.
could cut epinephrine and Narcan and drugs and stop going on house calls and just doing fire calls. I mean, there's a lot of things that can still be done, it's just not palatable. To me, it does put people at risk.
Thank you, Dave.
Yes, sir.
Are the street lights all under public works?
Yes, they are.
Yes.
And are there any city-owned street lights that be upgraded to LEDs or something like that?
No. We don't own our own lights. We pay CMP for that service. Street light's about $12 a month per light. Yeah.
I know that all the ones on the wooden poles are owned by Central Maine Power, but I was thinking about the concourse, things like that.
Oh, I'm
The
sorry.
city owns those.
Yes, sorry. On the concourse lights, we do own those. You said street lights, I wasn't thinking ones. So in the concourse, we do own those. And Mark Turner, I know, could remind me of any other lights like that, but actually you have a plan to replace those lights in the concourse, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to be with LED fixtures?
Yeah.
Yep. And that work actually is going to start?
Sometime in the next several weeks, we don't yet have the order in, but it's kind of wrong.
They're in really old condition, so now definitely was the time to do it. And LED is the way to go.
Mark, is that part of your budget for this year? Is that part of your budget for this year? The upgrade of lights?
That came out of some surplus capital funding that's carried over from 2 or 3 years. Came out of our facility account and did some facility upgrades at Public Works. We're using that to purchase a light. About $20,000. 19 lights were to replace.
Does that make them all LED, Mark, or is there still a percentage that's not?
Just the tall ones in the concourse, area lighting. Taller lights are the ones we're replacing at this point.
Are the other lights in the concourse owned by the city or just the tallest ones?
I think the other ones in the concourse would be owned by the city too. Yes.
So those would be a future upgrade.
Possible,
I
right?
think there's like 48 of the ones on the post with the acorn diffusers on the top. Kind of 48 of them.
You mean along Main Street or?
No, in the concourse.
Okay.
There's another 63 along Main Street, and I'm assuming the city owns those, but I don't know for sure.
Yes. Right. We would own those all on Main Street also, Mark, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All the decorative lighting is owned by the city.
If anyone's wondering, who doesn't know, it's a great question because you do save a ton of money on your power bill when you switch those kinds of lights.
Absolutely.
And
Probably cost would be.
and the new ones down by Hill Falls are LED, but the ones on Main Street apparently are not.
Right. Because the ones at Head of Falls were installed just 2 years ago? Yeah.
So that would be a good thing to look into for the rest of the
Right.
lights on Main Street.
Providing we have the capital to go ahead and do it. We were lucky to do it in the concourse because as Mark said, we had funds remaining from a building project at Public Works. So we're using that leftover money to do the concourse lighting.
This is a perfect example of looking forward and putting money into something that we know will help us grow in our future and help us
Save in the long run.
So these are the kind of things that could possibly be cut if we're not careful about making sure that we're looking forward and making good decisions based on something like that. That could save us money in the long run.
Mike, I apologize. I don't have my 3-ring binder. Can you just remind me what is under economic development? Because it's a big number, but I know it's not just Greg.
In the economic development line is Greg Brown's department plus the funding for the festivals, all the economic development agencies that we support, Waterville Main Street, Central Maine Grove Council, First Park, funding in there for the Fall Festival, for MIF. Basically it.
And how long is the contract with First Park?
Our contract with First Park is until the year 2021. Budget.
So is there a way to consolidate, under economic development on our city website, we talk about code enforcement and planning as part of economic development, but they also have their own line item here. And there are a number of organizations that also contribute to economic development. And is there a way to consolidate some of that for savings? Because that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. You know, the library is cutting more money than that. And it seems like there's overlap and that there are other organizations that are, I don't know, maybe doing some of the same things, so a way to be more efficient with that. As a cost reduction.
We've looked at that question how many different times?
Yeah, we actually had each of those organizations come in for the last 2 years and give, because especially the newer counselors, what exactly are they doing and what's happening. But the planning line is they're very different, I think.
Yes, I think they are.
You have a planning director, and code enforcement is our code enforcement officer.
A single person.
Right?
A salaried position.
But so is the library. I think that's to your point, is that they've made a significant and impactful cut. And for what falls under economic development, it seems like we could probably cover. Yeah.
It's an appropriate question because we have a number of different economic development agencies.
Right. And I mean,
one of them, Main Street is responsible for Main Street. The Central Maine Growth Council, which we support, is a 3-town economic development agency, so that's Waterville, Winslow, Fairfield. First Park is a 24-town, so they all have their own mission, and we've looked at ways to make
First Park we can't get out of.
Right.
Just
Mike, didn't we decide that we were dropping our affiliation with KV Cog as one of our cuts?
That is one of the cuts we made back at budget time, for, yep, 18,500, I think was a savings, so,
Yep,
right,
because
this
of
council has
that.
already made cuts, and that's one of them, which was on the edge of economic development.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make one more comment on the street lights. I checked with Efficiency Maine this afternoon, and the city is eligible for incentives as long as the city owns the street lights.
I see.
Thank you.
So the simple payback was probably around 3 years, and with interest rates a little what they are now, it's better to do it right away and wait.
Thank you.
But we'd have to buy all the street lights that are in the city, right?
No, I'm talking about the ones the city owns right now. Like in the concourse.
Right.
The 111 lights, we counted around 111 lights, 63 on the street and 48 in the concourse.
Yeah, those are the ones on the post with the acorns and the users on the top.
Right, but if we already own them, I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, they have, those are metal free lights.
Oh, we mean to do the LED switch.
Change
Right.
the LED,
I get
to collect the incentives from Efficiency Maine.
I see.
And the simple payback is probably around 3 years.
Okay. All right. They didn't happen to tell you what the initial cost would be per light for the switchover, did they?
We have to get the number from some contractor who would make a proposal or something. But
Okay.
typically that's around 3 years simple payback. For their conversion kit, you don't have to replace the whole thing.
I see. Mark, would you take a look at that, please, when you can? The idea of converting the street lights on Main Street that we own
We'll look into it.
to LEDs? We'll talk.
Is there any other discussion on the council, just keep things moving on this as far as questions or suggestions of where anybody else might see any further cuts? Questions from the audience, or I would say questions or suggestions, not commentary. Yes.
I was wondering, getting back to when you have purchasing power for LED lights or supplies for the fire department or police station, is it ever occur that Fairfield, Winslow, and Waterville all purchase together what their orders to get a bit of a collective discount at that point? So every town needs LED or the fire departments need new supplies, so you can collectively barter with a larger order. And as far as costs, have any of the departments ever been priced out at the benefit of privatizing them as opposed to the city owning them and having to deal with the issues that surround that?
I'll answer your last question first. The only department we've looked at privatizing is the trash collection.
Yeah.
And when Paul Page was here, he asked me to do that at that time, and it was more expensive to contract out trash collection. But that's a question we definitely intend to look at in the next 2 years to see if that's still the case. If it's going to be cheaper for us to contract out, I mean, we could well look at that. Yep. And the question about bulk purchase, we do that all the time. Yep, with many things, road salt, culverts, a lot of different things, oil, gas. Yeah.
And we share our chief.
Right.
I mean, so we are sharing personnel as well. We share our IT department, so we contract out with other cities. So our IT goes and works in other cities as well, and we get revenue from that, and we actually increase that revenue to make sure that they were getting, and the city was getting paid for the amount of the technology work that's being done in other cities. So
yeah, I think it's a story we haven't told very well, but you're right. Our IT department now provides IT services for Winslow, Oakland, Clinton, our library, the Winslow Library, Waterville Create. We've got 7 or 8 clients that we provide IT help for. The police dispatching, we dispatch for 7, 8 communities? 8 communities we dispatch for. Yeah, so we try to do that. We do share a fire chief with Winslow. So Chief LaFountain is here part of the day and then Winslow part of the day.
If I could look at, I'm Steve O'Coin, by the way, I've been here a long time. The other side is just the replacement reserve. Where are we now with that?
Well, that's a real worry. That's a real worry for us because, as the mayor said a number of times, we can't just budget for this year. We need to think about the next year and the year after that. So here is the critical number.
It's on the
It was
prior slide, right?
on the other sheet. I'll put it back. John. I think you go up, Carolyn. The city council has a policy that we're to maintain a fund balance, which is a fancy word for surplus. Our surplus, as part of our operating costs, should be 12%. So you see, we're just a little bit under that now, and
If you just point to the line and show it over the last couple of years, what we've used.
right, this is another very, very important part of this whole story. We were able to use 1.4 million to help our budget. Oh, we had to lose 500,000 because of the 12%. Now we're down to 600. We're below 12%. What's it going to be over here?
So we're actually breaking our own law by being at 11.8.
Yeah. And the reason keeping a fund balance at a certain level is important is because of our credit rating.
Because of our credit rate and that's right, our bond rating. So what do we do if we don't have 600,000 next year from surplus to apply to the tax rate?
It's my understanding that we were able to put back 100,000 of that this year.
We were able to,
Put back into the fund balance when we were discussing this, that when you were
We're-
anticipating coming under.
right, we had, I think Ridden started at 500 and we were able to go to 600.
Yeah, we took money out, not put it in.
But we were able to take out more than what we originally proposed because the picture was a little brighter.
Oh, I see. We put it in, then we took it back.
Right.
Correct, put it in and then took it back out. So I mean,
That's
that's
going to
a,
be an important piece, because that, at some point, is going to whittle to zero. We can't keep using the fund balance, and actually, really, at some point, we should start to build it back up. So, as we talk about our long-term planning, that's going to be a key piece, is how do we hold the line on the reserve? And because I think when Eric Haley gets up, you're going to see that the school has a piece that's in that too, and that's not going to be able to be used forever. So, at some point, we're going to have to cut that off, and we're either going to have to increase revenues or cut spending if you want taxes to stay.
I had a second part on that.
Yeah,
So what
okay.
does that do to our bond rating? What is, when we get this low? I mean, when I was on council, we set the market 18%. Obviously, we're not at 18%.
Every year, Steve, we set it to a lower percentage because we had to. And finally, we said, well, if we don't have a policy that stays, we don't have a policy. So we decided 12 is where we ought to stay. And
but you're right, we went from 21% at one time, down to 16, down to 14, down to 12. So we talked earlier about the fact that our state revenue sharing for the last 5 years has been cut $1 million a year. Our surplus total 5 years ago was 10 million. Now it's 6. So each year we've taken from surplus 1.4 or more or less, but we've drained our surplus balance down to a point where you have to be really concerned.
So how is the council looking at long-term planning? How does the city get involved in this long-term planning process? Because the budget situation didn't develop overnight. Clearly, it's been an issue that's been developing and growing for many years. So, how do we move forward beyond this budget season and look at comprehensive planning for budgets for, the next several years and even decades?
Sure. Right now, we're starting to have some of those conversations because when we looked at some of the revenues we were using this year, we looked at, like some of the revenue, if you look, is a one-time revenue, but we had to make sure that next year there was going to be something to make up for that revenue, and also try to factor in some of the projects that we know are going to be generating tax revenue over the next couple of years that will come on the books. But I think, to be honest, it's not, I mean, the city, it goes beyond the city council, because there needs to be a real serious conversation in the community about what is or isn't a core function that is to be put on the backs of municipal property taxpayers, because it is the most regressive form of taxation. And so that needs to be a serious conversation about where this money is going to be spent, because part of it can't be, well, we're just going to we just have to maintain paying for all the stuff that we're paying for now and just find a way, unless there's this insane boom of property taxes, which I would love, and that's going to be part of it. But it needs to be a real community conversation going forward, and I think this property revaluation was definitely a wake-up call for all of us as to what the real situation actually is.
I would urge the council and the community to really start that process immediately and not wait until next year's budget season when it becomes an emergency again. And like, as you said, there's 4 months of a budget review process, and that's probably not enough. And I think it's really important to get the whole community involved in the conversation and to have, information available online and really a call to action within our city.
I would agree with that, and I would just put it back on the community too, though. Every year, I know that the 2 years I've been involved, Amy Calder has quoted me in the paper multiple times saying, people, please come to meetings just like this one here tonight. And usually there's about 2 people in the audience, or it's the people who are asking for money. So, totally agree.
Perhaps it's a function of the city finance committee that, that I know John sits on and Steve as well, that looks at these issues and kind of starts to involve the public more.
I think it would be great to have some sort of task force or something to really look at. And I think it would be great to have people, that have these solutions and ideas to be on that and to be able to have these discussions, because I think that's what it's going to take, I think, for us to have this. Because it's true, to come in and then have, department after department, as you know, like they come in and talk about the budget and then try to come up with something, 7 of us, it's not enough. We probably need a little bit more.
I think we've got people in the community who want to be part of the solution.
We certainly do.
That's a good point, but I would suggest that if you want the answers to that, councillors go door to door and meet with their constituents and feel the pulse of the city. And as far as next year's economic, yes, it's very concerning. And I would hope that the city is monitoring sales with homes and talking to local real estate and seeing how this increase is going to affect you next year, and hopefully, put the brakes or try and avert a major disaster before this time next year. You need to be communicating with contractors, Century 21, real estate agents, before the ship sinks, and really be prepared, because this is a major change for the city.
Anybody else have a question about what's being presented here, or a suggestion of a further change to what you're looking at? Yes.
Before I came to the meeting, I did a calculation. 1 mil equates to about 150 residential homes being built, valued at $231,000. So translation, this means that the city would need to bring in $34.6 million in residential investment to equate to 1 mil. I guess when I look down the road a year from now and see what is not available for surplus, I think we're going to be in a pretty tough boat again next year, if not worse than this year. If the library can cut 5%, I guess I ask the other departmental heads, why are you only cutting around 1%? I think the residents are hurting. There's a lot of pain out there, and I think that we really need to do everything we can to shield the residents from this pain so that they can live in their homes as they so wish. And we've also got to revive our housing market, which I believe has essentially crashed since this whole situation erupted.
Any other comments or questions from the council? The audience.
Yeah, I'd like to I'd like to thank for, this is just like the mayor said, this participation of all residential taxpayers coming here for budget workshops, and in the future, I encourage it, just like he does. I think your input, I think the mentions of the task force are good, and I think collaboratively, we can go forward and involve more privatization and citizens to be involved in this process and this consensus, because I think that's what it's going to take. Year after year, like I said before, and many times, this is going to be a process. The mill rate is not something that you can flick a switch on in a dark room and happen overnight. But we have made some very significant cuts to reduce some of the, and alleviate some of the pain. It doesn't take away all of the pain, but again, it's a process, and I commend the council for reopening the budget, for agreeing to go back to the table. I think it's a great collaborative effort on everybody's part to be here and to roll up their sleeves and do what we just did and continue this process going forward for years to come.
And just, I realize we're kind of presenting a lot tonight, and we're talking about a lot. What will happen at next week's council meeting is the budget will come up, unless changes are made here tonight and people want to make changes, it will come as presented here tonight. You will have a week to get that information from the city. It is public information, so we can get you copies of anything you're looking at. And if you have other suggestions, there's going to be time for amendments next week as well, after this is kind of sunken. So if you think of anything, don't think this is your last chance to have a say. It's not.
I have a couple of suggestions, but there are things that will affect the budget down the road, not now.
Throw them out.
How about a local option sales tax? A bill came before the legislature, I think it was Senator Valentino that introduced it. I don't think it passed, but 38 states have in their state law a provision allowing a local option sales tax.
Right.
It will bring in a lot of revenues, and the bill she proposed was seasonal.
Last year,
Outsourcing.
yeah, a lot of the stuff, yeah, and thank you for bringing it up. A lot of people don't realize, we talk about local control, but really a lot of we really are held to what the state says we have to do. Just another example is last year, there was a bill before the legislature to allow us to create fire districts with it, which then allow us to bill out fire service as a fee. So that means that colleges and hospitals would all have to pay the fee based on square footage, just like water. So it spreads the cost of that service out, but unfortunately that was also defeated, yes.
I served in Maryland in the legislature, so a little history on the revenue sharing is that was a negotiation in the legislature years ago on the local option sales tax. And my recommendation, I'm not in the legislature any longer, but one of my recommendations is that the cities start getting involved. And in lieu of getting full funding from the revenue sharing, there should be a procedure where communities are allowed to use the local option sales tax. Either on, you could use it on inns, on lodging, or you could devise a way to make up that difference, because the local option sales tax was taken off the table because of revenue sharing. And at the time, the agreement was the 5%. And now that communities are not getting the 5%, you should go back to the table for that local option sales tax. And it's a really good, there's history there, there's some legislative history there. And it's probably time to go back, because it's been going on for a while now. So,
thank you very much.
You're welcome, Marilyn. We work well together.
Anybody else before Mike transitions over to Eric?
Well, another possible thing to consider is reaching out to foreign students. I know Blue Hill has quite a few foreign students, and they pay big bucks to go to school here in this country, because they learn the language, they prepare them to go to college here in this country, and I think it's something to sit up with.
We talked about the ethnic research.
That kind of segues into our discussion with Eric, because he's going to point out that we have one of the lowest per student pay rates in the state. This town pays less per student than most cities and towns do.
And we had one of the highest rates of students who need the extra assistance and special education.
I know, but a lot of these foreign students stay in local homes. Pay a lot of money to stay in local homes. So not only does the city get money, the school tax, but also local families willing to take in foreign students. This number.
Good evening, my name is Eric Healy, I'm Superintendent of Schools AOS 92, which represents Fassonville, Waterville, and Windsor. So not only do you share the Superintendent of Schools with 2 other communities, but you share 24 employees in the school system with 2 other communities. Roughly, you pay about 50% of my cost, you pay 50% of my assistant's cost, you pay 50% of my finance director's cost. That's what Waterville's share is based on the cost folder of the AOS 92. So we probably share more staff with other communities than any other department. I think that's a true statement, any other departments in the city. And of course, that happened in 2009, been going on now for 7 years. And as John mentioned, we do have the lowest per pupil cost factor in schools, other than Big Gardner, the closest one that is relatively the same as us. We are $2,160 per student, less than the state average. If we were state average, we would receive almost $4 million. We would have almost $4 million in school budget, but we don't. What I've handed out to counselors and also the school board members that are here, scattered throughout the audience, are 2 handouts. One of them is a summary of some revenue and expenditure work that we have done since the request came to the schools to cut $375,000 more out of our budget. The other handout is actually a 2-page handout. It's a budget expenditure report that's been updated to reflect these cuts. And the second page of this is a summary revenue page, which also reflects these cuts. I didn't come prepared because any other budget workshop session I've ever come to, as the mayor has said, had 1 or 2 people. I didn't come prepared with enough copies for everybody, so I'd asked that like every 3 people take one, the middle person holds it, and we, like we learned in kindergarten, we can share. Maybe that'll work. I'll start it here. So you have one 1-page handout and 1 2-page handout for every 3 people, and I don't know how far that will go. If you contact my office in the morning, I'll guarantee you we'll get you a copy electronically. And I'll give a minute for those to spread. All right, when the city asked us to cut $375,000, my job as superintendent is to
I'd like
pull,
to have it, yes. Thank you.
my job is to pull the administrative team together and make recommendations for the board's consideration. And I told the board that you're going to see some pretty draconian type cuts because our budget was lean to start with. When the city council asked us if we could find $61,000 just prior to approving the budget, if we could find $61,000 more, which is what we were asking for in new taxes, we couldn't. So we couldn't find $61,000 then. To find $375,000, I said, means we're going to either eliminate people or we're going to eliminate programs. It's the only way we're going to be able to get $375,000. So I made these recommendations with my own recommendation for the board not to accept any of them. But just to show the picture of what $375,000 would do to the school budget. We could eliminate 8 teachers, and I actually went through and found out who those 8 teachers would be and used their actual cost to us. That's $371,619, which doesn't include the 90-day statutory requirement that I'm under to notify teachers when they're being reduced in force, which means I'm going to pay them 90 days per diem as a penalty for every day that I don't notify them prior to June 1st. And we know what the date is today, and we haven't made the decision yet, and so nobody's been notified. And by virtue of then having to pay that penalty, I'm not going to get $371,000 from 8 teachers. I would probably have to go, and I have not done this absolutely, but I would probably have to go to 10 or 11 teachers in order to get $375,000 at this point in time. Eliminate the whole high school alternative education program, which is now in lease space down at the old main police academy. $311,680. I have teachers there as well, so I have a 90-day statutory requirement for notification there. That's not going to get me $375,000, but it will eliminate the whole program. Eliminate our entire adult education program. That's $378,191.80, and I have 90-day statutory requirement there. So I may get $375, but I doubt it. I'm eliminating something like that. Obviously, there are smaller amounts of money that we could pick out. But when you're looking at $375,000, could I go to every department and say, give me 1%? Yes. It's not going to get close to 375, but I could do that. And then, anybody that's listened to me talk about budgets before has always heard me talk about the two sides, or the two heads of a budget. There's the expenditure side, which everybody wants to talk about, and then there's the revenue side, which seldom do people really look at. So on the revenue side, if we needed $375,000 and we had a pot of gold, we just add school revenues for $375,000. So the recommendation I made was increase the amount of the undesignated fund that we use as a revenue by $250,000, and increase main care fund, which is monies that get reimbursed to the school system for medical necessities that we perform for students. So if somebody needs occupational therapy, if somebody needs speech, we can get reimbursed through main care for those services that we offer. As long as we meet requirements, we have licensed people, and there's a lot to it that you can get reimbursed for those services. Yes, John?
Does your undesignated fund constitute part of our 12%?
As I understand it from Chuck and Mike Roy, they do count the school's undesignated funds as part of the city's, yes.
And if you remove that $248,000 from your undesignated fund, would you have any undesignated fund left?
Well, you're giving me a good segue to go right into that sheet.
Okay, sorry.
And it will explain exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to talk now about the one-sheet handout. On 7/27/2016, I gave the board an update on where we were with the undesignated fund. As of June 30, 2015, we had $502,318 in that fund. As of June 30, 2016, we had $504,906.72. So we added about $2,000 to that fund. We allocated originally $250,000 of that to help support the 16-17 budget, with the idea that we would leave about $250,000 so that we could do the same thing the next year. If we take another $248,055 under the 8/8 date, which is a recommendation that I did make to the board, even though I think it is fiscally irresponsible, because we're not going to have any money left in the undesignated for next year if we do this, which means we have a $500,000 hole before we even start thinking about building a budget next year, just from the undesignated fund. But without making those draconian type of cuts that I talked about previously, that's what we're going to have to do. Main care fund. As of June 30, 2015, we had $325,890.05. It dropped a little on June 30 of 2016 to $294,059.18, and we had allocated $100,000 originally to go into the 15-16 budget. 16-17 budget, thanks. Recommendation on the revenue side to the board was add $100,000 more, or $125,000 more. while at the same time looking at the possibility of doing a few other things to maybe decrease it a little bit. But the long and the short of it is, the school's recommendation was to add $375,000 of revenue. Then we started thinking about that, and because we are, as Mike mentioned earlier, we are in this budget right now, we have already expended funds out of the 16-17 budget year. We have found some savings. So again, on that one-page handout, under the date 8/8, you'll see the undesignated fund, increased revenue of $248,055, decreased expenditures, and all of these are in technology. Technology server, we're going to try and go another year without replacing a server. So these are all cuts. Kimono Software, which when the company, which gave us a quote, found out that we were an AOS and that we were 3 school systems, not 1, they tripled our quote. Now, Kimono Software, for those of you that don't know, and I only know what to tell you, so don't ask me any questions about it, but it's a comprehensive software app that populates multiple other apps with names, addresses, telephone numbers, the data that either has to be put in by hand or else you have an app that will populate so that your library electronic book-taking out system has the same information that your transportation director has in their transportation system, that has the same information that food service people have in their point of sales, cash registers, that has the same information that the teachers have with grade reporting, the same information. You get my point. Somebody has to add all that data by hand unless you have an app. It will take the common information and populate it. So we didn't have the money to do 3 times our quote, so we eliminated it. But we didn't find that out until we actually started to get to the implementation phase in July. And obviously, if we're not going to buy the software, then we don't need the installation cost in the budget either. That's $1,500. And then we had money in the budget to buy what they call Milty buyouts. Now, Milty is the laptop initiative that takes place every year when, well, I should say every 4 years when they recycle those, they give you the chance to buy some of those back. They're 4-year-old machines, but you can buy them back at pennies on the dollar. We had appropriated some money for that. They refreshed the program a year early this year and said nobody's going to get the opportunity to buy them back, because the state's going to take them and sell them to try and pay for refreshing the Milty program a year early. So we bought some Chromebooks out of that money and then returned the rest of the money in a cut. So there's $15,850. Then instead of using $100,000 of main care as a revenue source, and there's a reason for that which I won't bore you with, but it involves school finance and how you get reimbursed and manipulating the school system to get the biggest reimbursement we can with how we expend our dollars. Knowing the essential service programs and services funding model, it would not help us, the city of Waterville, if we used that extra $100,000. It would help us to reduce local taxes that would hurt us as far as reimbursement we're eligible for from the state. And so our thought was we would get reimbursed for the whole amount if we bought items out of the budget that are in the general fund. In other words, use $100,000 of main care to buy some things that were in the budget and then cut them out of the budget so we could reduce the budget, which in turn reduces your tax rate. And at the same time, keeps the school in a position to maximize its reimbursement rate from the state for the money we spend. So the things that we would buy out, there was some network equipment for $82.20, a telephone lease for $22.5, Chromebooks that we had in the budget for a particular school, and $60,000 worth of math textbooks, which it says George Mitchell, but those are really George Mitchell and Albert S. Hall School. Those are K-5 math books, new series of math books. If you add all of that up, taking the revenue on one side and cut in the expenditures on the other, it's $375,000.
And that represents a increase or decrease over the 015, 016?
That's it. Our budget is now, geez, John, you're giving me great lines tonight. Feed right into the next handout.
You do that up there.
I wish I could say we talked and planned this out ahead of time, but this is the 2-page handout. I direct you to the very next to last column, bottom line, you'll see $6,871.96 in pounds. That means it's a negative number. So on the expenditure side for the 16-17, we are that much less than the previous year on the expenditure side. Flip the page. I know there's a lot of numbers on there, but I don't think we can be bothered with all of them. That number was the major issue on that page. If you flip over on this is the revenue sheet, summary revenue sheet. Got a lot of fine print on it. My board members complain, they need magnifying glasses most of the time to read this. We try to show you as many years of experience as we can, so you'll note that it goes back to 2012-13, works itself across horizontally to the present 16-17 year, where you see that our budget request now is $21,171,746.07, which represents a 300% decrease. Now go all the way to the bottom of that column, and you'll see a number in a box. That number is what we're asking the city for new taxes. And you see it is in a negative status as well. So this year, if the board accepts, you accept what I just recommended, we would be asking the city for a negative $314,966.61. Less dollars in local taxes on the school side.
Versus last year.
Some of that money was extra left over from how it's compensated for that.
The undesignated fund, which is where I'm saying we're being fiscally irresponsible because we're now spending $500,000 as a revenue that we don't have coming back next year. So if we have a completely flat budget for next year, we're going to be $500,000 short. Minimum. Because we're buying $100,000 worth of main care. Now main care, I'm hoping we can refresh at least enough so that we can do that again for next year.
Are your enrollment numbers flat or are they?
Our enrollment numbers as of October 1st, which is one of the April 1st and October 1st, as of October 1st, we're 1,849, which is relatively flat, which is a good thing compared to what's happening in the state. Our numbers are holding a little better than what our 10-year projection was, but we are projected to lose some students. All schools are, other than I think one in the state.
Eric, I've heard some complaints that your administration costs are through the roof. How does your administration in Waterville School compare to administration costs statewide?
System administration is about 1/4 of the cost, but that's because we're on AOS. We have the exact same number of people employed in the superintendent's office today. No, that's not true. We have only 2 more people employed in the superintendent's office today than we had when we were just the Waterville Public Schools. So system-wide administration is about 1/4 of what the state average is. So we are very lean on system. Now, when I say system administration, I'm talking about administrators that work across school systems, across the schools. So not a principal, but a director of special ed, a superintendent of schools, an assistant superintendent of schools, a finance director, payroll, maintenance director, transportation director, people who work across all schools, they're AOS employees. I came here in 1985 and I was a Waterville employee. In 2009, when consolidation happened, I was converted to an AOS employee. AOS is this kind of entity, I call it a cyberspace entity. We don't own property, we don't own any teachers, we don't own any students, we don't own any buses. We are just an administrative service that is shared amongst 3 school systems. Similar to what fire chief is, shared with 2 communities, and I don't know if we have any others that are shared here in the city. Somebody had a question. Yes, sir.
I recently read something and would like to know if it's close to being true. I read that 20 years ago, in the past 20 years, the school budget was doubled, but we got about half the students. Is that true?
Partially true. We have more than half the students that have that. Then we have about 2,500 down to 1,849. But yes, and I did this exercise, or somebody did it for me. Actually, I think Scott did it for me. If you look at the consumer price index over that same year, over those same years, consumer price index rose 2.3. During those years, our school budget rose 2.6. So I would say that's an exorbitant increase. Here's one of the things that happens with schools that most people don't take into consideration. Because we're a department of the city, you think we're smaller than the city. The school has 3 times the number of employees that the city has. So when you give a 3% raise or a 2% raise, we're giving 3 times the amount of money that the city's giving. If insurance rates go up 12%, our costs are 3 times the city's because we got 3 times the employees. When the state said they couldn't afford to pay Main State Retirement anymore, and they gave a piece of that to the schools, and now they're projecting they're going to raise that 18% for the next school year on the locals. They're passing off their costs back onto the locals. We're getting chewed alive. So yes, is the number, did it double during that time? Yes, but it's not. When you say, geez, $10 million, that is a big number. But over 20 years, it's what I consider an acceptable increase.
Right, but when you consider the increase in students, how does that factor in?
Well, what year did you graduate from high school? I won't make it personal. Let's say somebody graduated from high school in 1972. Why? There was not a computer in that school system. There was one nurse for the entire system. She gave half a day to each school building. There wasn't a tech director. There weren't 1,000 computers that had to be purchased and maintained. There was no such thing as a Milton initiative. Most of your special needs students, your really severely special needs students, were in the Little Red Schoolhouse. They weren't in the schools and they weren't the physical responsibility of the schools. We had no such thing as social workers in the schools. You had one guidance counselor for the entire school. We've got a nurse in every single building in Waterville. And I have never, I can honestly say this, I have never stepped into one of our buildings and not seen them right out straight. Because what's happened as our population has gotten poorer is that we've become the primary care physician. Our school nurses are taking care of students who don't have a primary care physician. How much drug addiction did we have in 1972? I knew a few good old boys that drank a little bit too much, but I didn't know anybody that was dying on heroin. And we didn't have babies that were being born to crack cocaine heads and to heroin addicts. I have a nurse on my Vassaro board. She said, 5 years ago, Eric, we might have one drug-addicted baby in the maternity ward in a month. She says, we're having 5 to 10 a week now. And we don't know what that's going to cost and what their issues are going to do. The school is a different place than most of you remember. It's a different place than I remember. And to be honest with you, if I wasn't working in school, I wouldn't believe it. I would not believe it. We have a homeless liaison officer to deal with the 67 students that we have that are registered as homeless. We have a bus stop at the homeless center. That didn't happen in 1972. I didn't know anyone that was homeless in 1972. We have monies appropriated to buy them school clothes, to get them school supplies. And we've got a free and reduced lunch rate that's almost 80% at George Mitchell School. And everybody will tell you that your elementary school is the closest, truest, actual free and reduced rate. Because as kids get older, they don't want to be seen as free and reduced, and they underreport. We have a summer lunch program where we feed anybody 18 and under in the city. Anybody, no questions asked, because of the large free and reduced that we have to deal with. Now, nobody wants to say that the poor bring you issues, but the poor bring you issues. There are a lot of things that they don't have that they need, basic necessities. And every one of my staff members is doing the best they can to give them the extras, whether it comes out of their own pocket or they can figure out some way that the school can spend some money for.
Are we required by law to provide all of that?
Yes, we are required by law. The homeless, they have a special statute in regards to what we're required to do.
I think that's a very good suggestion.
William, can you stand up? Because we can't hear you back here, if you don't mind.
I think it's a very good suggestion, what you mentioned earlier about going after certain monies. Was it through the occupational therapy?
We do that, maybe, yes.
So you know, maybe there's other areas too with that the state.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I mean, there are more areas in occupational therapy.
So in this budget meeting, are residents with ideas able later to discuss with you possible helpful suggestions with that budget later tonight?
Anybody that has a suggestion, all ears.
And is the tech center contributing equally with Winslow and other users? Is that?
The tech center is completely in the Waterville budget, and we charge a assessment to each community based on the previous year's enrollment. And it's equally shared based on the enrollment. Similar to what the EOS does, we charge an assessment to Vassboro and Winslow based on our cost sharing formula from my salary, Peter's salary, Paula's salary, any AOS employee. It's an assessment. And that's why we have to do that budget. We develop 4 budgets for the school year, by the way. So, we're doing budgets all the time. This is the latest I think I've ever had to do one. But I've started some this soon. I mean, we'll probably just get this one finished and I'll be starting the AOS budget. I have to have that one done by mid-December because that's a number that all the 3 communities need in order to start building their budget. And I asked, our budget process starts with building level in November. I asked my administrators to get me their building budgets by January 1st, and the board starts working, reviewing, and having public session in January. And we schedule special sessions then. Correct. You want me to direct mayor, or would you like to direct?
If people have a question for you, do find me.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood, $500,000 rainy day fund, or what did you call it, undesignated fund? That's money that the school district has kind of set aside for emergencies or for unexpected expenses?
It's not set aside purposely. It's money that we don't expend out of the previous year's budget. So if you picked up, I said we added $2,000 this year. In other words, we had $2,000 of surplus that we could drop into the undesignated. By state statute, the schools have to use that money to offset local taxes within the next 3 years. And you're not allowed to carry any more than 3% of your total budget into the undesignated, which we've never done.
And like part of the reason, if you look at the city's numbers gotten smaller and smaller too, is because a lot of that was from that carryover and savings, and each year as we get our budget, rightfully so, more and more to what we're actually spending, it becomes a more accurate budget. There's less and less of that carryover into the next year.
Yes, Susan?
Eric, can you review some of the cuts that were already made in the budget before this part of the process?
Well, as you don't know, that's Susan Weissart. She's on the Board of Education, very active on the Board of Education. Probably a good suggestion. Thank you, Susan. On March 1st, we presented recommendations for cuts to the high school, to the school budget. The first recommendation was to cut a science position at Waterville Senior High School for $54,407. Cut a proposed Albert S. Hall School self-contained teacher, and I say proposed, I want to be very clear about that. That wasn't an existing position. It was one special ed director said, we really need this position. We're going to be out of statutory requirement. If we don't have this position, we cut it. Proposed Albert S. Hall School. We cut a proposed Waterville Senior High School resource room teacher. Again, a proposed position. It wasn't in existence, but it was one that the special ed director said, I'm having a review this year. I'm out of compliance because the law sets how many can be on a caseload of a special ed teacher, and we're pushing that number. We cut a proposed maintenance position. We removed a guidance counselor from the budget. We a senior high school guidance counselor asked for a year leave of absence, and so we replaced with a half-time social worker. We reduced the junior high school, senior high school ELL teacher, English language learners, teacher to 4/10 from 8/10. Reduced the Latin position at Waterville Senior High School from full-time to half-time. We have an unfilled social studies position. At that time it was unfilled, but we had a savings based on what I budget for an unfilled position. If you have an unfilled position, you don't know if you're going to get a person with a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, a doctorate, 5 years experience, 10 years experience, 15 years experience. So after a number of years of doing this work, I've settled on mastered 5 years experience as what I use as a guide when I have an unfilled position. Sometimes that's enough, sometimes it's not. We lost a strings teacher this year at the high school. Well, he actually works in 2 other schools as well. Really sad to see him go. He's a great instructor. We replaced him with a doctorate or CAS, very veteran strings teacher. That cost us $22,000 more than what we budgeted for. You get hit sometimes hard like that. Other times you lose a very veteran teacher because they retire and you're able to absorb that position, which is what happened as a high school science teacher. We had 2 very veteran science teachers leave. That's why we can save $54,000. We reduced the business position to half-time at the high school, cut a half-time social studies position at Waterville Senior High School. We had a little bit of insurance savings. Again, we don't know what Blue Cross Blue Shield's going to charge for their premium increases for the year, so we budgeted 10%. It came in at 8.8, so we had a little bit of savings there, so we took that. Reduction of a secretary in the Waterville Senior High School main office. Eliminated a half-time contracted service. It was an English teacher that we actually bought from Winslow High School. We paid for half her cost, and Winslow High School paid for half her cost. We eliminated that contracted service. And then administrators have a tuition reimbursement benefit, which pays for coursework, which we have to budget for because it's a contractual obligation we have, but when we get down to the nitty-gritty, I go to my administrators and say, are you really taking any coursework next year? And if you aren't, we really don't need to budget that money. And so, like Peter and myself, we've gotten our 3rd degree beyond high school, probably not going after the 4th, so give up that money, because it's a benefit we're not going to use. So we had 5.5 reductions there, which were $21,000. That was a total of $482,000. And that, I think, was the 3rd round of cuts that the board done. So,
What was the total for how many bodies or total? And that's before the 375, is that correct?
correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. Another half, 6 and a half. 7 and a half. 8 and a half. And a contracted service, which is a half, so that's 9 people. Yes, Ron?
I just thought because the size of your enrollment decreased.
It's remained relatively flat over the last couple of years. It was 1,849 students total.
Got the whole student family?
Is that what?
You're talking about the whole,
That's all in Waterville, yes. 1,842 students, which is almost exactly, it's pretty amazing actually. Everything we do in Waterville is about half in the AOS. That's about half of the student population in the AOS. We're running about 3,800 students right now in the AOS. We're the 6th largest school system in the state with the school population. Yes, sir.
Just so you can hear me. I will say, I was doing some research on school budgets, and this doesn't seem to be typical for Waterville. They were saying the whole nation is struggling, and every year schools are expected to do more with less money, and they don't see it getting better. Every town in America they were talking about. Every year it's harder for schools, and maybe some of that is because, you know, the social programs the schools are doing, that gap hasn't quite been bridged by the state yet to alleviate some of the suffering. But this seems to be a problem in every town in America, not just Waterville. Everyone's really struggling how to provide services to schools with less money every year.
mental health counseling, I didn't even mention. We didn't have mental health counseling in the 90s. I didn't even know what mental health counseling was in 1972 when I graduated from high school. And we have mental health counselors. We have waiting lists. Adolescent mental health counseling, pretty sad.
But how did the school get all of this? I graduated in 1964.
You're my sister's class.
My parents fed me. I had my breakfast at home before I went to school. My parents bought me my clothes. My parents, I mean, we had parents in all of this now.
Nobody wants to talk about the demise of family structure, which is not socially acceptable.
Well, I'm sorry.
So it's the white elephant on the table is that if you look at the major institutions, church, government, whatever, schools being one of them, and families being one of them, which ones have survived the best over the last 50 years? I dare say it isn't families. It is not families. And so schools are doing the best we can because they're human beings, we're nurturers, we're caregivers, and we're trying to make up for what we see as a need.
But when, and I'm sorry, teachers, I don't mean to make enemies of teachers, but my taxes just went up $1,000. If I can't afford to pay the taxes, then the school's not going to get their money.
Yes, it's tough.
Something has got to give.
Yeah, it's a tough dilemma. But what's going to happen is a starfish story. The guy walking with his friend down the beach and stopping, grabbing a starfish and throwing it in. There's thousands of starfish on sand. He said, what are you doing? He says, I'm throwing starfish back into the ocean. He said, that made a difference? There are thousands of them here. It's just going to make a difference to that one. And that's really what happens with teachers and children. Is I can't solve all of their problems, but I can make a difference with one. And I can make a difference with this one. And that may be the one, selfishly speaking, that 10, 15 years from now is going to make a decision about my retirement system. And they're going to have morals, and they're going to have ethics. And they're going to have some sanity about what's a reasonable thing to do with their kid's retirement system. But they're going to make a choice about whether or not I can get into a nursing home when I'm hopefully 95.
She's saying you need her paycheck to do it. So she has to remain.
I understand what the problem is, and I have a lot of empathy with that. I can tell you what my taxes were, and it's considerable. I don't argue about that.
Isn't a lot of how schools function and programs that were really mandated at the state level, or even federal level, depending on what.
Well, I was going to say, we just got through No Child Left Behind, which was a severe mandate by the federal level, of which they paid very little money to do it. I mean, that was the biggest farce on the American public I've seen in the last 40 years. That was all out. But yes, the state has a lot of mandates. That the other thing is that we're running about 80% personnel costs. And that 20% that's left is, they're fixed costs. It's your oil, it's your electricity, it's your water bill, it's your sewage bill. It's all those things that you pay, but we pay much higher. You don't have a lot of flexibility.
I just thought that, I look at the graduating class of University of Maine Farmington. You all know University of Maine Farmington is about teachers. They do fantastic community college.
They do an outstanding job.
Fantastic. And my girlfriend is a Beaver alumni. Okay? What's she started at? $18,000. $18,000 each. And so what I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is, I think we're pivoting from the Cadillac to the Honda. So if that guy approached you and said, the strange guy said, well, I'm a PhD, this is the drop in the bucket, I understand. Maybe you don't equal PhD. I know we're proud, my brother was in music at Waterville, I have Waterville alum. I mean, why do we need PhDs? If the state doesn't mandate that we have PhDs, can we get some new?
They don't have a mandate on PhD.
Right, what more are we even asking?
My mandate comes from my board that says you get us the best possible teachers you can get us.
What is that, the possible for?
That's not been the mandate. The mandate has been to get us the best possible teachers you can get.
Would that be serious? I mean, well, I mean, okay, so that's an area.
I haven't heard of that. That's what they've done.
Aren't there a lot of, every year there's tons of graduates from really great schools that
probably would not cost that much. And we could put them on a, yes, you can come work at Waterville School, the Waterville School system teach music or teach math, but you need to be working on your master's degree. They don't necessarily have it, so they don't have to pay them.
And I just respectfully disagree with that, and I'm very conservative on this city council, but I want my daughter and my grandchild to have the best teacher they can have. I don't want him to try to save, $10,000 to give him somebody that's just babysitting in the classroom. I want the best teacher my kids can have, so I disagree with that.
Well, yeah, but you want the best part of your money, you want the best education your kids.
Not only do I think my daughters deserve it, I think every single child, whether you're living in a homeless shelter, or you're going to the high school, or you are struggling at home, or you come from an affluent family, I think I want Waterville schools to have the best, not only reputation, but the best teachers, because when somebody is looking at where they're moving, families look at schools. And if we continue to cut these schools, and if we continue to talk badly about our school system, you are hurting the future of this city. And I think that we need to talk about this in a way that will offer some solutions down the road without hurting our school system. And it sounds like we're coming up with some creative, we have a very devoted school board, we have a devoted administration, we have a devoted council. So I think we need to look at making sure that our schools, we talk good about our schools, we support our schools, we cheer for our schools, we go to their games and we cheer for them. We don't sit here and talk about why are we hiring good teachers for our school system. That's just not something we should be doing.
I drive on Waterville, I don't argue close in the video.
I think the nutshell of this whole conversation, and I'd like to try to wrap it up with Pam, I will let you speak after any other comments, is Waterville's in a dilemma, and it's twofold. If we have the highest tax rates in the state, like we do right now, we are not going to get families in here buying and paying for houses and paying bills that are going to pay for the schools. Wait a minute. But if we also don't have strong schools, we're not going to get those people either. It is a really difficult pinch. These are complex issues we're trying to work out. So that's the dilemma that Waterville's in. We have to have strong schools, but we also cannot be taxing the people who are paying, because we have all these children who are special needs and who are poor. But at some point, we get into an economic situation where if they're the only people left, the property taxpayers who are paying for those services aren't going to be here. But also, again, the way to get them is the tax rate combined with strong schools, and getting more students in the school creates a rising tide.
And the tax rate right now is 22.8 mils. That's 5 mils lower than what we were at, correct?
Correct. And I'd like to recognize Pam, then we're going to move on from this topic.
I am also a member of the school board. I want to point out something someone said, the Cadillac system. Waterville is a long way from the Cadillac system as far as the schools are concerned. If people come to Waterville and they want to buy a house and they go to a real estate agent, one of the things they look at is cost per pupil being spent in the communities. Winslow spends more, Fairfield spends more, Oakland spends more, Sydney spends more, Augusta spends more. We are the lowest per pupil rate in Central Maine, with the exception of Gardner, and we're at the same rate as Gardner. If you people want to think that you're going to sell your house to people moving into town with children with the lowest rate per student in Central Maine, you need to rethink that, folks, because we won't. We do not pay any teachers higher than any other community in the area, and most of our levels are lower. We've been working very hard because we have a hard time getting teachers to come to Waterville because they make more money in Fairfield and they make more money in Oakland. This is isolated incidents of a specialized teacher. There are not a lot of people that teach strings, and Waterville has offered strings for many years. It's a program we'd like to keep because we attract out-of-town students to come to Waterville because of our strings program. But I think it's very important when you start talking about what we're spending, you want to compare apples to apples. We are not driving a Cadillac, folks. We're already driving a Honda. So no, we're not. We're paying less Then any other
Right. There's going to be order in this meeting. This is a budget workshop. If we want to get into the side commentary, that will happen at the next meeting when people have time to do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to say that, cutting the school budget and not serving the needs of kids, you know where those kids are going to go? Right into the community. This isn't like a zero-sum game. You can't get away with cutting the budget, cutting the mental health services, cutting the social work services, because those kids are going to be the kids that are going to be on your streets. They're going to be the kids that are going to make Waterville a place people don't want to move to. And because of the fact that the school is actually interacting with these kids in a really positive way, trying to do what you can do, they're actually creating a system where, you're going to have kids that feel a part of the community, taken care of a little bit better than they have been, and that doesn't come cheaply. But it's not a town you're going to want to walk through with a lot of homeless kids on the street, a lot of kids that are uncomfortable to walk by. I've worked with teenagers all my life.
Sir, do you have I guess I'm trying to curtail this meeting, and I said at the beginning, if you have a question about the budget being presented, or if you have a suggestion of something that can be done, and excuse me, sir, and I've tried to limit other people too, and when it starts getting into commentary, because the time for commentary will be when this council votes next week at the city council meeting.
Fine. I do have one suggestion. I don't know whether it's been, thought about, but AmeriCorps has programs that offer a lot of young people coming into school systems at a very, very reasonable cost. You can get like 10 AmeriCorps workers, young people that are invested in doing some of the kind of work that you're doing very reasonably. It's a 3-year, 2-year commitment to them. I would just suggest that you take a look at that.
Steve.
Eric, my new question. Are we still paying to use the gym at Waterville for graduation?
Yes.
What? How much?
$500.
Chris.
Simple question. We're here for the budget, but how are we gonna fix it? Like, what's the answer? I mean, the budget's gonna go off, all departments need the money, I understand that. But can we get a tax, the nonprofits, or combined with another town or something? I mean, nothing's gonna change, the budget's gonna go up every year. The way it is, there's no, right, Eric? I mean, you need all your money, the school does, all departments do. You can't cut.
Okay.
You can't cut, so how you gonna change the budget?
Actually, we can cut, and we did, and I think that's what, I've opened it up. Nobody has suggested any further cuts. If you have one to suggest, we can get details. But I guess I'd like to keep this as a productive workshop and try to keep this moving. If you have a specific question about this information or a suggestion of what we can do with this information, yes, sir.
Is there a way to put together, we talked about a task force for the city and their budget, for the school, and a way to bring in any kind of revenue, rather than cut and work things out? For example, like reaching out to different organizations to donate things that we're already providing to those students, like clothes and stuff like that. I mean, I know it'd be small, but just a way to put some minds together to figure out how to cut some of those small things out by putting it on the backs of other people that may be willing to help. That maybe.
That's a great suggestion, we already do it.
Okay.
We have donations that people make, we have clothing donations, we have money donations. We take all the donations we have. For instance, one woman found out about the number of free and reduced children, and she was more concerned about the reduced as opposed to the free, and she gave an amount of money so that a certain number of students could eat, that were on the reduced rate, could eat for free for the whole first semester. And then she did a different group of students for the second semester. So we have those kind of people step forward. We have people that buy clothes and bring them in for us. We have teachers that buy clothes and bring them in. But yes, we're looking for every available service we can. Mr. T every year goes to Augusta. We have a group down there that donates backpacks stuffed with school supplies, and I think this year brought back 75 or 80, something like that. This truck is full, and he comes back. Yeah, we do all of that.
Do you think that having more volunteers would help? we've got an aging population. And,
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not aging.
I wasn't talking about me. The shoe fit.
We have a lot of volunteers. Of course, a lot of it's during the, involved in the extracurricular activities, whether it's a drama or sport, we have booster clubs. So we have huge numbers of volunteers there. We don't get as many volunteers, but the ones we have are very good and been with us for a long time. Would more happen, would we eliminate a paid position if we had more volunteers? No.
Well, no, I'm not talking about that now. I'm talking about all of the problems we seem to be encountering right now. It seems to me that if you had some volunteer leaders, for instance, I did that at George Mitchell School for a while. You know, and then
We still have people doing that.
yeah. Do you think we should use more?
We have close to 200 Colby mentors, 225 Colby mentors that through a program that was developed at Colby and brought to the schools, they can down and mentor children.
Well,
That's
the
very
other thing is,
effective.
do you think having foreign students might add to it?
Yeah, I kind of shook my head and said, we looked into that very seriously. It depends on what kind of visa they come on. You know, if they're coming through a recognized foreign exchange program, that's relatively easy to do. If they're just a foreign exchange, they're a student, not coming through a recognized program, there's very strict licensing requirements. And in fact, we had that at Waterville High School. We had the intent of, we were looking at the possibility of 10 Chinese students. It didn't materialize. And the red tape that goes with it.
Is there any other questions about this budget? Because I feel like we're kind of getting into this conversation, and I want this to be a little bit more efficient. Yes, sir, I will follow you.
I guess for some summaries and clarification, what was the mill rate last year? Given these cuts, what is the proposed mill rate? And what is the increase or decrease in taxes being asked of the taxpayer? Because I think the number on this white sheet says one thing, but then the words I've heard are much different.
Right, because it is confusing, because you've heard the number of 5 mills. That was a result of a property revaluation. So it was 27.8 last year, that's correct? So the mill rate last year was 27.8. When we went to the first draft of the city budget, it would have reduced it to 27.6. But we had this property revaluation, so your values went up and the mill rate went to 24.5. However, your bill might have gone up by $1,000 or $2,000 because now your house is valued at 30 or 40% more than it was last year. With this round of cuts, since the budget was voted on, it was a reduction, and with increased values from the survey, it was a reduction from 24.5 to 22.8. So that's the final. The total amount less from taxation is the number that you see there, which is about $890,000, or $889,000 less this year from taxes than the city asked for last year. I hope that makes sense. I realize there's a lot of moving parts. It's hard to put them together. Mr. Mayhew, question?
I'd like to ask Mr. Haley, do you think the decrease in enrollment, would it be feasible thinking ahead to perhaps close one of the schools, maybe the Hall School, and shifting those students to that school? Is that been looked at?
As superintendent of an AOS, I have 3 school systems. Each of them have their own issues. They all have their own buildings. If we had complete control, the autonomy to move our students where we had space, we could close two schools. And I've said this many times, we could close 2 schools now without any school construction work. But we don't. So if we really wanted to start saving a serious amount of money, and this really gets out there in far-reaching thinking, and I said this to Mike Floyd, is that what we do is that we unincorporate the city of Waterville, and we unincorporate the city, the town of Winslow, and we create a new city with one town council, and one school system, and one fire department, and one this, and one that. That's how you're going to save money. Because that's another whole issue.
Yes, sir.
Eric, just a quick question. Are donations
Yes, they are.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to commend the council and the departments as well for looking at these cuts and just urge the council to perhaps look at an amendment to create a budget task force to address these issues and take immediate action on the task force, convene it with stakeholders and interested council members to look at next year. I think you've done a great job squeezing the budget for this year and, really seriously look at our future budgets.
All right. Mike, have anything else?
I don't. Next Tuesday night.
Next Tuesday night, city council meeting, we'll vote on the budget. Thank you.